Welcome back to the Patient First Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bryan Laskin, and I'm excited to help increase the influence of today's engaged dentists, which we are going to do today. I think for anybody who's listening today, this is one of my favorite books of all time that we're going to do in our ongoing series, Books Applied to Dentistry. Frankly, probably my favorite series that we're doing here because it helps me revisit some of my favorite books of all time. If you're into Stoicism or Greek philosophy, Seneca, one of the great philosophers of all time, would always recommend rereading old texts. And so I have a very short list of what I call my Seneca's list of my books that I want to reread on a regular basis. And this is on that short list. The book is Traction by Gino Wickman. So Traction is a book that sets out a operating system for a small business called EOS. I've run several of my businesses through EOS, and now we do kind of a hybrid of EOS and a few other systems that I've incorporated along the years. But EOS and Traction was really sort of the first system that I put into practice in my practice that made a massive, massive change. And I don't think you necessarily need to incorporate everything into an average dental practice. So I'm going to highlight the few things that I think you should at least get started, not just in your practice, but in life in general, frankly. So Traction breaks a business down into 6 key components that I'm not going to go into here, but he takes a deep dive into each of them. So I highly recommend, if you own a dental practice or are running a business, reading this book. I think there's going to be some gold in there for everybody. It's one of the 4 books that I have actually in my office out for me to reread all the time, partially just because I love the book and I love the content, but also partially from personally when I read the book for the first time. Most parents can probably identify with this who have kids who are older than a certain age. I'm in Minnesota, so we were stuck in the frozen tundra, took a spring break trip out to Palm Springs, and we were just chilling at the pool. I had a beer, and I had my copy of Traction, which at that point, the spine hadn't even been cracked. And my kids were about 12 and 8, and we were at the pool, and they were running up and down a slide that was at the pool. And I remember thinking and realizing, I can read this book and not look at them 100% of the time. It's an amazing experience. If your kids are younger, if you don't have kids, and you haven't had this experience, it is one of my key experiences in life, realizing that my kids were old enough that I didn't have to keep an eye on them at all times. And it really heightened the experience of reading this book too. But you don't have to have that experience to like the book. Lots of great information in it. So I'm not going to go deep again into the separate components of running your business, but the big ideas that everyone, I think, can implement, starting off with what's called the 90-day world. So Gino Wickman breaks basically any big thing that you want to get done down into a 90-day segment that you can get completed. Now, there's all sorts of research out there that shows why 90 days is the longest amount of time that the human brain can kind of focus on. But what Gino does a really good job in Traction of doing is describing how you should set a very long-term goal of maybe 10 years, he suggests, then breaking it down to an annual goal, but then importantly, writing down what you can get done as a team in the next 90 days to get you towards your 10-year plan. So I don't want to discount the importance of having long-term goals. I think those are very important, but you can't really, there's kind of nebulous. So breaking it down to what you're going to get done in the next 90 days to get you on the trajectory to hit those long-term goals is vitally important. It's commonly said, and I believe to be very true, that people grossly overestimate what they can get done in 1 year and underestimate what they can get done in 10 years. So make sure to think really, really big for 10 years and then bringing it down to what's really actionable down to the 90-day level so that you can make sure to hit all of your goals. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Anything smaller than 90 days, Gino Wickman calls to do, that should probably get done in about a week. And so in the EOS Traction world, 90-day goals are called rocks. And so setting rocks is a skill that takes a lot of practice. So if you haven't set 90-day goals for yourself before, I would recommend it. And just keep in mind that if you're doing it for the first time, you'll probably be way off if you're anything like me. It took me years to be able to set the right rocks, as it's called in Traction. So some keys to helping set the right goals is make sure they're smart. And I've talked about this on this podcast before. Goals need to be specific. They need to be measurable, meaning like quantifiable. Something like be better at something isn't good enough. It has to have a number attached to it typically, or something that can be checked off as done. It needs to be attainable. You don't want to set unrealistic goals because they're demotivating even to yourself. Or if you send goals that are too easy to hit within 90 days, it's not going to be enough of a stretch, and you're not going to get as far along towards your long-term goals as you want. They have to be relevant to what your goals are. So if you set a long-term goal and this is a rock or a 90-day goal that gets you off track, it's got to be killed. It has to be relevant to what your actual long-term goals are, and then it has to be time-bound. So either a week, two months, 3 months. I never go longer than 3 months when it comes to time goals, unless I'm doing annual planning. And I think I'm going to let's say I'm going to write a second edition of the Patient First Manifesto, which is going to be coming your way very soon. That I can get done in probably 60 days or 2 quarters maybe. So I'll put a 6-month goal for something sort of bigger than that I'm not working on today, but I want to get it done by a specific moment in time. Now, one of my favorite quotes that Gino Wickman kind of addresses directly is that the chief source of problems is solutions. So moving beyond setting your goals, when you're in a meeting or when you're talking with somebody and you have an issue that you're looking to resolve, I believe in human nature, one of the biggest barriers to overcome, one of the biggest obstacles, is trying to jump straight to a solution. And so Gino in Traction talks a lot about how to solve issues or how to solve problems. And it comes down to what Albert Einstein said, which is if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. Because, as it's commonly noted all over the place, if you understand the problem, the solution is usually self-evident. So how many times have you been talking or having a meeting with somebody on your team and realize that you left the meeting solving a bunch of useless stuff, like not useless, but lower priority things, and then you didn't have the biggest priority issue that you've solved. So 2 big concepts that Gino goes into very well into Traction is A, setting the right priorities. So listing every issue you have and then prioritizing them and only addressing them in the order of priority that you have. This takes a lot of discipline. And my team fails at this all the time because it's so easy to go, oh, this is a quick solution. A, there should never be a quick solution. There should be a permanent solution to a problem. And B, you should never just jump to an issue. You should have all of your issues and then prioritize the highest priority ones. Because if you get a permanent solution to your biggest problem, if you spend an entire hour talking for 55 minutes about one problem and then for 5 minutes talking about one solution, and you only get 1 out of 10 done, but it's the highest priority one, research shows that you're going to get a lot more done than if you hit all 10 and you come up with half solutions. I hope you caught that. I went through it fast, but it's key. If you didn't catch it, either rewind it or certainly read Traction. He goes into it in very, very big detail. It's vastly important. Also important, which I see teams all over, even teams I'm part of, making this mistake all the time. Not teams that I'm leading, but when you do have a rock or a to-do, or when you want to get something done in your office, make sure that only one person is assigned to that task. One person, not 2, not 3, not a department, because if there's not one person who's taking responsibility, nobody is. If Bob and Jane are doing it together, Bob can say, well, Jane didn't do her part. Jane didn't say Bob didn't do his part. And ultimately, it unravels any shred of accountability that you have to get a task done. Even to yourself, if you're doing it, it's easy to rely on the other person. Now, obviously, we can't do anything in a vacuum, so we're going to be relying on other people to help us get our stuff done. But one person's name should be in the box that says who's going to be in charge of this getting done. So it takes a lot of discipline and also a lot of practice, because if you're setting goals for yourself or somebody else and it needs to rely on other people, how you word that goal or that rock or whatever you want to call it is incredibly important, because sometimes other people don't get their stuff done, and that can make the person fail at the goal, right? So it takes a lot of balance, a lot of practice. Gino goes into it in great detail, but I want to point out, because I think it's a big issue that I see happening every day in organizations that I'm part of, but not leading again, that not one person is in charge of solving an issue or carrying a ball forward to hit a goal, but it's a team or it's a couple people. So make sure it's one person that's accountable for everything. I like to call this person the neck, as in, whose neck am I going to choke, like Homer Simpson here? This is an old Simpsons picture, obviously. But I think, obviously who's responsible. That saying the neck is easier than who's responsible in my world. And it's also kind of fun. I mean, obviously, we don't want to demotivate people if they don't get their goal done. We want to be supportive of them. But ultimately, it's somebody's neck on the line to get something done. And that one person can only be one person. It can't be two. So those are my tips from Gino Wickman's Traction. I've got a few advanced tips based on how I've applied this in my career. So number one, which is also something that I do a lot of, is whenever you do your planning, not just your 90-day planning, to go off-site. So I just actually booked myself into a hotel room a couple days ago to do my 2022 planning. And that hotel room was about halfway between my practice and my house, which are 3 minutes apart. So I literally went to a hotel that's a minute and a half away from my practice and maybe 3 minutes away from my house, and sat there for a day and did planning. Why? Because when I remove myself from an ordinary environment, it frees up your creativity to think bigger when you're thinking of longer goals. But even quarterly or weekly planning, if you have a big thing that you want to get accomplished, it works for me. You might want to try just going to a coffee shop, freeing your mind from the existing space that you're in, and not just for you, but doing team meetings off-site is something magical. If you haven't done it before, I would highly recommend it. Go to a place where nobody on the team has been to before. Rent out a room at a conference center or at a hotel, and it really opens up the people's thinking so that you think in a new way, which certainly helps solve issues that you may have had for quite a while, right? Number two, let other people on the team lead. So it's for those of us who are very type A and want to get a lot of stuff done. I know this is one that I'm probably talking to myself more than anybody right now, but letting other people lead the meeting is great because it helps you sit back and really process issues or help prioritize them. And also letting other people prioritize and answer before you do. So I'm always trying to think, am I the best person to be answering this question as we're going through a meeting? And oftentimes, even if I think I have the answer, it's best to listen to the feedback from everybody else in the room, which is incredibly hard for those of us who are leading and are used to talking at people all the time. So when you're running a meeting, hand the ball to somebody else to run the meeting, and then let everybody else on the team prioritize and answer before you do. That way also has great impact when you do say something's the number one priority. Everybody's going to pay attention, because if you never prioritize and then you once say, we need to talk about this first, everybody understands the seriousness of that issue. And then if you talk first, or when you say something and you're not used to giving input, those words have more impact. And the last one that I have is always have something with you where you can capture issues, because I'm always surprised that when I don't capture my issues and have a list ongoing, what I forget about when it comes to talking about at a meeting or when we're talking about issues as a practice. And I hope you are meeting with your team and discussing issues, because if you're not, I definitely read Traction and get everybody on the same page and how to do that. But I use OneNote, which is a Microsoft product, probably because I can use it on any device, and obviously I'm a huge nerd. So I like Android devices. I've got iPads. I have PCs and Macs. I've got all different devices. So using either a Google Sheet, which is what I used to use, or Microsoft's OneNote, which is great for taking notes, or Notability if you're an iPad person. There's a great number of them, but just make sure something that's convenient for you where you can jot a quick note so that you have a list of issues, so that when you go to a meeting, you're not trying to think of it at that point in time. that's my wrap up of Traction from Gino Wickman. I hope you got a few nuggets out of it. There's a whole bunch in that book. Again, I'd recommend it for anybody to read. And if you like tips like this, we're putting together a work group to help basically double the size of any dental practice within the next year, in the year 2022. And so that work group, I'm very excited about. It's coming together very well. I've been working on it hard for the last about 6 months. And we'll be unveiling more information about it. But go to dentaltreadmill.com if you want to get on the list to be part of that work group that's coming in the first quarter of 2022. Thanks again for listening and for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. If you've read Traction, you have more thoughts about things that I skipped over that I should have included, or if you don't like what I meant, my team is effective. I don't need to have one person on the team. Let me know. I'd love to hear it. Put it in your comments or hit me up on LinkedIn. And thank you very much. And I look forward to talking with you in a future episode.